I found my partner passed out after an odd. After trying to save him, I outed his drug use on social media. Everything spiraled. This is going to be chaotic, and I apologize for that. However, I need to provide the background story first. I encountered my partner in August of 2024. A few weeks into our relationship, he began displaying signs of substance abuse. I would inquire about it, trying to understand what was causing him to doze off persistently. On several occasions, I returned home after allowing him to stay at my place while I worked, only to find him passed out in a small pile of vomit. The troubling part was that he was genuinely ill, severely so, and I know it was true because I fell sick as well. When I confronted him about it, I experienced a panic attack, as I had dealt with other people's addictions in the past. He attempted to console me, insisting he was not using, but he gradually fell asleep while trying to reassure me. Afterward, I took his things back to his place, attempting to retrieve my belongings in return, but he kept insisting he was not using and described how much effort it took to get clean in the past. Then he sent me a message saying not to worry about him anymore and that I would not see him again. He had previously made suicidal remarks, so I called and texted him to clarify what he meant by that, but received no response. Fearing for his well-being, I rushed to his home only to find him extremely high, dismissing my concerns and claiming I didn't need to worry about him because he would not be going to work any longer. I had helped him secure a job with me. I had an ex who frequently threatened suicide, and my partner was aware of this. After a few days, we managed to reconnect. I was foolish and still cared too much, filled with pain and numerous questions. During our conversation, I asked if he was clean, to which he answered affirmatively. A few days later, he overdosed in my bathroom. My instincts had been warning me that something was terribly wrong. He had a small pouch attached to his belt that I suspected contained something illicit, but I didn't want to hurt his feelings by confronting him. He had prepared a lovely dinner, and we were watching Kill Bill. At the time, I was also unwell. My ears were blocked, making it difficult to hear, and I was so exhausted that I was trying not to fall asleep while he was in the bathroom, aware that this was likely when he would use. A significant amount of time passed, and when I knocked, there was no response. I attempted to open the door, but his body was blocking it. With only enough space to reach my arm in, I pushed him away. Once I did, I rolled him over, called 911, and began chest compressions until emergency services arrived. After regaining consciousness, he refused help, and since they administered Narcan, he immediately entered withdrawal and became angry and hostile. At that time, I was still unaware of what substances he had consumed, but the emergency responders warned us he could overdose again. He began to express thoughts of suicide, lamenting that no one was there for him and claiming that his life was a disaster. After he left, I contacted his friends seeking assistance, but one of them chastised me for allowing him to leave alone. He returned for something, and I accompanied him. He told me to leave and went on about everything that was wrong in his life, insisting that it wasn't worth living. He had previously confided in me about how everyone had abandoned him. I felt guilty and terrified that the person I cared about might die. I returned home with him, but he refused to let me enter. Before going upstairs, he asked for a cigarette, appearing completely vacant. I was already feeling used for physical affection, emotional support, and even food. I reached out to his roommate to check on him so that someone would be there for him. She messaged me, saying he was panicking and that she didn't know what to do and needed assistance. Her boyfriend and I went upstairs, but as soon as we arrived, he disappeared again. I had no idea where he went or if he might be dead. I gave the roommate Narcan and left. I couldn't sleep afterward. All I could envision was his cold, lifeless body and the sounds of performing chest compressions. I eventually discovered the drugs he had been using in the bathroom and took them to be tested. They were fentanyl and benzodiazepines. For a while, I hadn't heard from anyone, but eventually, the roommate informed me he was awake, had eaten, and was doing slightly better. She invited me to come by. I went to check on him, and he appeared to be in bad shape and all alone. He apologized, expressing that he cared for me and did not want to be isolated. I stayed with him, ensuring he was breathing while he slept. I would return home to rest, only to wake up in a panic and rush back to check on him. He wanted my presence and seemed pleased that I was there. Over the next week, I continued to monitor him, trying to discuss what was happening and what the future held. I would arrive to find the stove left on while he was unconscious, discovering him on the floor in his own vomit, things like that. He told me he had talked to his dealer, who informed him he would be cut off in a week. This gave me some hope. Then one morning, I arrived to find him missing, with a note saying he would return. I became furious and decided I would wait for him to come back and end everything. When he eventually returned, he seemed himself again up and moving about, coming back to life with enthusiasm and engaging in projects again. This renewed hope sparked within me. For a while, things improved, but occasionally, the substances he was using would make him irritable and disorganized, although he would show signs of improvement afterward. At one point, he was using an old phone of mine, and I mentioned I needed it back eventually because it contained important pictures. He sold it and lied to me about its whereabouts. I insisted he retrieve it since he claimed he had simply left it behind. I knew he was being dishonest, and my suspicions were confirmed when he called to reclaim it, and I overheard his dealer revealing that he had sold it. I yelled at him, feeling justified for all the times he had berated me. In a moment of distress, he cut himself in front of me. I stopped him and saw how badly he was bleeding, so I applied a tourniquet. When he regained consciousness, I intended to clean his wounds, but upon examination, I could see the extent of the injury. He required medical attention. He was terrified of being left at the hospital by his mother, fearing she would not return for him. I convinced him to go and stayed by his side the entire time, providing him with gummies to help ease his discomfort. It felt as though things improved after he contacted a detox center, but there was a waiting list. Unfortunately, he began asking me for money, and I succumbed, understanding his pain and acknowledging how bad his withdrawal symptoms were. I believed him when he insisted it would be temporary until he could detox. For a time, things went on like this, with me urging him to go to the hospital, while he would express his desire but ultimately hesitate at the last moment. I would accompany him and wait while he went to his dealer, standing by for over an hour because he didn't want to be alone, afraid of what he would do. He often spoke of just wanting to run away, recounting instances of having done so in the past. I was plagued by nightmares and struggled to get more than 3 hours of sleep at a time, terrified I would wake up to find him lifeless and that I had slept through it. I could not handle the weight of everything. Finally, the detox center called, and they needed to ensure he was medically stable that day so they could take him the following day. We visited the center, but he insisted he wouldn't take Suboxone, which led to them not signing off on him. He discussed how he would navigate the system, but eventually they told us they would not sign off and that we could simply go to a doctor. This was a lie. We needed the approval from them first. It was over. He had claimed so many times that he couldn't get clean unless he followed that particular protocol, and now that option was gone. I told him I was finished, that everything was over, and that he had built up this notion that it was the only way. Now it was lost. He insisted he would get clean. He would do anything necessary, even if it meant detoxing at my place. However, I lived downtown, close to dealers and the street scene, and I had to work long hours. I reached out to my mother to see if he could detox at her house, and he did. We stayed with her for a week in late November of 2024. Things seemed to be improving. He was still depressed, but the self-harm had stopped. However, he had not yet found employment. During this time, he was also evicted from his home, so I packed all his belongings I could gather while he was at my mother's and stored them in a storage unit, which I continued to pay for. Things continued to improve as we began discussing our feelings more and working through various issues. I was gradually feeling secure enough to sleep again. However, one night, I woke to find him absent, causing me to panic. I knew where he had gone and realized he had taken my money. I went out searching for him and found him returning from his dealer, but he was carrying a bag of snacks. He admitted that he had been planning to get more but was unable to. He handed me the tinfoil and emptied his pockets, revealing that he had no drugs on him and was not under the influence. Then, a week later, on New Year's Eve, his behavior changed again. I noticed something was off, and there was once again money missing. This time the tinfoil he had returned to me was gone. I confronted him, and he denied using. I broke down, crying and convinced that I was losing my mind, apologizing profusely and believing I was merely overwhelmed and imagining things. I sat curled up in the corner of the room, repeating apologies. 2 days later, he confessed that he had used but had not finished it and had flushed the rest down the toilet. I disposed of the tinfoil, lighters, and matches, hiding any cash I possessed. Things improved again for a while, until last week. I began suspecting him of using again and attempted to discuss my insecurities with him. I expressed how I felt wrong for accusing him, but needed some reassurance that he was not using and desired security in our relationship. However, whenever I attempted to address my concerns vocalizing the pressure I felt as the sole provider and managing various challenges, he would react defensively, expressing feelings of inadequacy, stating he could not do this or did not know how to do that, before ultimately leaving at 4 a.m. I had just completed a night shift that ended at 1 a.m. and had to work again at 3 p.m. After he left, I fell asleep and woke up at 10 a.m., realizing he had not returned. I called his friends, but there was no answer and I felt done. I started packing his belongings. But an hour before heading to work, I discovered a can that had been used for smoking drugs. That was the breaking point for me. All the pressure, the deceit, the feeling of being used and foolish, and the anger over him endangering my cats rushed to the forefront. I began destroying his belongings that were in my home. I went to work, stewing in all my anger, striving to hurt him and ruin his life, just as he had ruined mine. When my shift ended, I was consumed by rage, repeating "fuck you" over and over in my mind. I contacted his friend, stating he needed to come pick up his belongings by 9 p.m. When he failed to show up, I completely wrecked everything he had left behind, his clothes and laptop, feeling justified in my actions at the moment. I had witnessed him destroy his own laptops before, so what was the difference? He had sold or lost 2 of my phones, taken my winter jacket right before winter, and stolen over $1,300 from me for substances. Despite this, I had taken care of him, bought him nicotine, and provided him with marijuana. I did everything for him. I wish I had stopped there, but I didn't. I had access to his Instagram account on my phone and posted about his fentanyl addiction, detailing how he would steal from anyone, even including a picture of him nodding off with the drug test results and the can I had discovered. I wanted him out of my life. I wanted him to despise me and never approach me again. I deleted the post within an hour, but many people had already seen it. I revised it to state that I did not care about him and would utilize him to achieve my goals. When he came to collect his belongings, I returned his backpack, screaming at him that the rest had been thrown in the trash. I also discovered that the night before he had taken one of my kitchen knives and harmed himself. He requested to talk, but I was unresponsive, declaring that he had ruined my life, that I couldn't sleep, that I was in debt, and that I could not trust him. He could go fuck himself. He called again the following morning about his items in the garbage, and he finally returned to pick them up. Unfortunately, the trash collector had already come, so most of it was gone. Our argument intensified, and things became increasingly contentious. I later messaged his friend, expressing regret for my actions and acknowledging that I shouldn't have involved her. I made matters worse, and I was truly sorry. She requested the login code for Instagram, which I provided. He posted stories, and it seemed he had seen and was aware of my earlier posts. He continued to come back, and I kept allowing him entry because I felt responsible for what I had caused, but I couldn't suppress my emotions. I attempted to tend to his wounds, which were deep. Everything that transpired made me feel like I was going insane. I committed an unforgivable act, and I couldn't undo it. He had nowhere to turn. He attempted to hang himself at the mall and was now sleeping in a parkade, and he was no longer welcome there. He had seen the posts. I had destroyed his life, and now he lay in my bed, his hands swollen, his arms and neck cut up, and his feet damaged from being outside. He emanated an awful odor. I'm at a loss for what to do. I love this person, but I can't have him here anymore. Everything is ruined. I regret everything, but I cannot reverse my actions. There is so much more that has occurred, but this is all I can express at the moment. I feel lost and terrified that I have ruined his life. I retrieved more clothes from the storage unit, yet he refuses to take them, insisting they will just get stolen. I am struggling to maintain my composure right now, unsure of when I might lash out again, or if I can manage this situation. Story 2. Was I wrong for asking my best friend to invite his own best friend to his wedding? At that time, I, then 22 years old, was very close to my best friend, then 21 years old, whom we shall refer to as Tony. I was his closest friend in real life and had known him for nearly a decade, maintaining daily communication for most of that period. To me, he was my best friend and my only consistently reliable companion. Reflecting on it now, I realize I relied on him too heavily during a time when I was grappling with depression. My perception of him as my best friend, however, was one-sided, as his closest friend was a 24-year-old woman living in another country. We will call her Carla, whom he met online at the same time he met me. She was straightforward and provided him with plenty of valuable advice. Due to their conversations, he improved his physical health, started taking better care of himself, and became overall much healthier. He also communicated with her daily, even more than with me. Initially, I felt a pang of jealousy, but soon I found it enjoyable to see them engage, and I learned not to let it bother me. Nevertheless, Tony's communication style would change whenever he started a new romantic relationship. He would become completely unavailable, a common occurrence in most relationships. However, after about a month, he would resume our communication. It became evident that whenever he began dating someone new, he would vanish from our social circle for a while. There was one woman, whom we shall refer to as Jean, possibly in her early 20s, whom he met while working at a part-time job, and it seemed they hit it off immediately. They conversed frequently, but while my friend had a deep passion for nerdy hobbies and aspired to be a video game developer one day, she showed no interest in discussing those topics. Fair enough, I suppose. Couples do not need to share all the same interests. However, given that his hobbies occupied a significant portion of his time for both study and leisure, it struck me as unusual. He also spent significantly more time with her compared to previous partners. What would normally be a day's wait for a message could stretch into a week when he was with her, and he nearly stopped playing games with our friend group altogether. I conversed with Carla instead, and discovered that Tony had also been communicating with her infrequently, though more than he did with me. Fast forward 7 months into their relationship, and they were getting married. I was genuinely astonished. My friend was only 21, still in college, and was marrying someone he had known for less than a year. He had always fallen head over heels for anyone he dated, but this situation felt different, a sentiment shared by all his friends, especially Carla, who, while congratulating him publicly, was perplexed in private. Their wedding was scheduled for slightly less than a year after they had first met in person, making everything feel incredibly rushed. Some time later, he asked me to be his best man. Naturally, I felt honored, but I was known for being disorganized and found myself questioning why he chose me. I soon learned that Carla had, in fact, been his first choice. On one occasion, while Tony was sitting next to Jean, he and Carla were texting. Carla joked about individuals with humanities degrees, unaware that Jean could see the conversation. As a humanities degree holder herself, Jean was deeply hurt by this. From that moment on, Jean regarded Carla, and by extension her partner, as undesirable, and no matter how much Tony defended her, Jean refused to accept any positive words about Carla. It took weeks for Tony to finally tell Jean the details of their wedding, only to reveal that Carla would not be invited, although she could attend the bachelor party. Originally, Carla was meant to serve as the best man and was now excluded from the wedding but invited to the bachelor party. When we consulted those more knowledgeable about weddings, they said that situation was quite peculiar. It is important to note that Carla and Tony had never met in real life, which meant she would have to spend time in Tony's country while he got married in a ceremony where Carla and her partner would not be present. Ultimately, Carla decided not to attend the bachelor party, feeling frustrated but not enough to confront Tony. Then, Tony invited me to visit him via train so we could shop for suits, and I planned to ask him to reconsider inviting Carla to the wedding, perhaps even allowing her to be the best man. While I was there, our conversation flowed like it had before, filled with inside jokes and playful ideas for games. It reminded me of the good old times. It was clear that Jean found this peculiar and remarked that Tony sounded entirely different, as if we were conversing in another language. She also appeared somewhat unhappy driving us. Tony did not have a driver's license and had to rely on Jean for transportation, which seemed to cultivate some resentment. Eventually, Jean had to leave while Tony and I purchased some beverages, and during that time, I broached the subject of inviting Carla to the wedding. She was his best friend, who had contributed immensely to his personal growth, and it would be the first time they would meet in person. I wanted to defend my friend. He expressed a desire to accommodate my request, but mentioned it was not what Jean wanted. I pressed him further and asked him to give it some thought. Upon returning to Tony and Jean's residence, Tony excused himself to the bathroom, and he quickly stated that he needed to discuss the situation with both me and Jean. He couldn't wait. I was caught off guard, but I would do my best. I attempted to communicate my perspective to Jean, but she was unwilling to listen, adamantly stating that she did not want Carla to make any inappropriate comments, such as criticizing her dress. I reassured her that Carla was diplomatic and would not insult a bride on her wedding day. Since Tony seemed willing to entertain my points, he even supported some of my arguments, but Jean abruptly announced that she had to take a phone call. Tony and I retreated to the kitchen, where he began preparing some chicken while we continued our conversation. Then he received a call. It turned out that the wedding was off. Jean had driven away and called her mother, subsequently contacting Tony in a fit of rage, claiming she could not believe how poorly he had treated her. He immediately sought to apologize, and I was left in shock. The phone was not on speaker, but I could hear almost every word. Eventually, the call ended with the announcement that the wedding was canceled. He simply stated to me, "Well, thanks, op." I remained there for hours, feeling a profound sense of disbelief. Ironically, their humor-loving lesbian roommate walked in during this time and began making jokes at my expense, while Tony was in his room, loudly expressing his sorrow to his former fiancé, repeatedly saying, "I'm so sorry, you're so right about everything." I managed to respond weakly to her comments and felt genuine amusement when she remarked about how quickly they were getting married. As night fell, after Jean had been gone for hours, she returned, calmly acting as if nothing had happened. She apologized and explained that she had experienced something quite tragic, which had affected her emotionally. While I empathized with her, Tony was on his knees, continuously apologizing, insisting that he would never act in such a manner again. It was disconcerting to witness my friend so submissively begging for her forgiveness. They assured me that I hadn't done anything wrong and that everything would be all right, but in the meantime, the chicken he had been cooking had gone cold and burned. Fast forward to the next morning. I had spent the night on their couch, and they were behaving strangely, indicating they needed extra time to prepare for their day. We headed to a cafe, where we conversed as if nothing had changed. However, when trying to explain something Jean might not have known, she interrupted, saying she didn't want to hear it. When we arrived at the train station, they embraced me, and it was during this moment that Tony told me, due to the previous day's events, I could attend the wedding as a guest. I looked him in the eye, feeling genuinely betrayed, and simply walked away. I could hear Jean gasping faintly behind me. It wasn't merely the fact that I had been demoted from best man. It was the realization that they had lied to me, assuring me everything was fine. I returned home and shared the news with some family and friends, including Carla. Eventually, I received a final message from Tony, stating that he did not want me to discuss him or his fiancée with my friends, many of whom were mutual acquaintances, and expressed disbelief over my actions. He also sent a farewell message to Carla and her partner. Subsequently, Tony called Carla to see if she wanted to talk. During this call, he unexpectedly included Jean. This marked the first time Carla, Jean, and Tony conversed together. They attempted to reshape the narrative, omitting many details I had shared and portraying me as an insensitive jerk. They hardly allowed her to speak, concluding that their actions had been justified and that I had nearly jeopardized their wedding. After the call, Carla was taken aback by how fiercely they had turned against me. Years have passed since this incident, and although it initially hurt deeply, I've managed to move on. Now, I view it as a peculiar and somewhat sad story about how I lost a close friend. What continues to linger in my mind is whether I was justified in turning over this particular stone. Should I have simply remained uninvolved? Story 3. Aita for blowing up on my father for breaking his promises. My parents finalized their divorce 13 years ago, and I, 18F, moved away from my hometown 6 years prior. My father, 38M has been somewhat consistently involved in my life. We were close when I was 5, but after the divorce, he remarried my stepmother, which left me feeling neglected in favor of his new family. My stepmother had 2 children from different relationships, and together they had 2 more kids. My parents shared custody, so I spent weekends at my father's house. Initially, I enjoyed being part of his new family, and he made an effort to include me. However, everything changed after their wedding. My father, working as a police officer, had to put in long hours, which meant he had less time for everyone, including me. I was okay with this until I discovered that on the weekends I wasn't with him, he spent time with my siblings. This infuriated me, and whenever I brought it up, he dismissed my feelings, claiming I was being influenced by my mother. He often made promises to spend time together, such as my 8th birthday when he claimed we would go out for lunch. I was thrilled because it had been ages since we had done anything like that. I remember waking up early to prepare. Yet, just 30 minutes before our scheduled outing, he canceled, saying he had to work overtime. I was devastated and ended up crying in my room on my birthday. This pattern of disappointment continued for another 4 years, leading me to become deeply depressed. Fast forward to the present. It has been 6 years since I left his household, and I am thriving. I have begun managing my depression and exploring new opportunities. My father still attempts to be a part of my life, and I allow it because my mother always encouraged me to give him a chance. This is where my story truly begins. My father traveled to my new state for a police event and once again promised to spend time with me. We spent 3 to 4 months planning an amazing weekend filled with dinner and museum visits. However, when the weekend arrived, he canceled 3 times within 3 days. When I expressed my disappointment, he brushed it off, stating, "Sometimes in life we have to suck it up." This was the last straw for me. I confronted him, stating that he was only half invested as a parent and pointing out that those who genuinely want to be involved make time for their loved ones. I took nearly 20 minutes to express 13 years' worth of emotions and trauma. By the time I finished, he had no words. I resolved to cut him out of my life for good until 2 weeks ago when he sent me a text, which I will share here. I have been trying to truly have empathy and patience to understand where you are. I hear you, but the perspective seems quite one-sided. You claim that you are the one carrying the relationship, implying that I am merely a burden who contributes nothing, which is not accurate. I call and text you as frequently as you do me. I'm not like those who stay on the phone for hours. That has never been my style. You compare the time I spend with your siblings, but if you lived here, I would take you to all your extracurricular activities just as I did when you lived with me. I work hard to pay off all the past legal bills, as I fought for years to be part of your life, which was frustrating on every level. I feel like I have been treated as a father who just appeared in your life, even though I have been there since day one. My thoughts are acknowledged but not respected, making it difficult for me to communicate. I have been treated as your father on an as-needed basis. Ultimately, I do not wish to engage in endless back-and-forth communication and simply want to move forward. Dear, you are stubborn just like me, so please view this message as a step towards change. And of course, you will always be my child, and I love you unconditionally. After reading his message, I felt a surge of anger. How could he fail to recognize the pain he had caused me? So I replied with this: "Thank you for your honesty. That is all I have wanted from you." When it comes to the weight of this relationship, I believe being active means being present, making time for one another, and following through on commitments. You frequently overestimate your availability and make promises without knowing if you can fulfill them. If you had communicated your expectations clearly from the start and then failed to keep a promise due to external circumstances, it would be a different conversation. My biggest annoyance is when people say they will do something and then do not follow through. I know you are not the type to chat on the phone for long periods, and I don't expect you to change that. This isn't about altering who you are. It is about redefining our dynamic. Pretending that everything is fine when it is not is challenging, and I have never felt comfortable discussing my feelings with you. You often deflect my emotions and challenges by suggesting that I am being manipulated by my mother, which has made it difficult for me to approach you about sensitive topics. Yes, you have been excluded from certain aspects of my life because I feel you do not recognize me as the young woman I am becoming. You only see me as your little girl, and that harms our relationship. While I acknowledge that you are still dealing with legal expenses, that should not impact our relationship, as I did not instigate the court action. I am not meaning to be disrespectful. However, you tend to view our relationship through a lens that has little to do with us. Certainly, those legal costs related to spending time together, but I was not present during the courtroom discussions that dictated those matters. They should not influence your relationship with me. You continue to assert that if I lived nearby, our relationship would improve, but the main reason for my departure was that our relationship was far from healthy. I was struggling, and leaving Milwaukee was essential for my well-being, a fact you even acknowledged. The improvement of our relationship requires effort from both of us, not solely from you or me. We have both endured significant challenges, and neither of us knows the full extent of the other's experiences. I hope this can be a constructive starting point, but that ultimately hinges on how you respond. I have been attempting to extract feelings from you at my own expense, and that cannot continue. If you genuinely wish for this to be a turning point, I am fully open to that. What I need from both of us is honesty. The way I hold you accountable is the same way I hold myself accountable. So, am I the asshole?